Hey everybody, this is Lauren Stein over here at Acctivate. Today we're going to change it up a little bit from what we've been doing for our webinars, and we've got a couple of guest speakers to cover how to safeguard your Acctivate data. We've got Keith Fileccia, the Senior Account Manager, and Mike, the Computer Guy from Mendelson Consulting with us. You'll be learning a whole lot of information on backup processes and options both included with Acctivate as well as outside of the software. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Keith so we can jump right into this.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks for letting me present today. Essentially, whenever we do an Activate implementation, one of the things that we look at is making sure there's a backup strategy in place, not just for the Activate data, but for all critical and important data. There's a picture of me. So the most important thing is to back up. Every IT guy on the call is going to agree with this slide. You can't say it enough. It's one of the most overlooked things. People tend to think that there are hardware platforms, they invest money in technology, RAID arrays, redundant drives, redundant servers, all that fun stuff, but it doesn't always capture everything. So inherently inside of Activate, we want to back up because, number one, the data inside of Activate is more valuable than your initial purchase costs. So you might have spent however much money on the initial purchase of the software, but it's the data that's the most valuable. In an accounting terms, the data is what will drive things like goodwill if you want to sell your business. The costs to recover it are astronomical. So, for example, if equipment fails, so I remember being on site with a client, and we were trying to do something on the server, and every time I tried to do it, I got a white screen on their Microsoft Server 2012. So I said to the owner, let's do a reboot, but we can do that after everyone goes. And he said, oh, no, that takes 5 minutes. Okay, well, your call. So the first thing that happened when we went to reboot the server is 28 Microsoft updates. So now this 5-minute ordeal is now taking much longer. And I remember the girls in the front, I walked out to get a coffee, pointed at me in front of all their customers and says, it's his fault. So finally, Microsoft updates 45 minutes later finish. And as it's coming back up, it says in the BIOS that drive 3 of your RAID array, your RAID 5 array, has failed. And so now I have to explain to the owner what's going on is every time you do a call, the reason it's so slow is that it has to rebuild the data. It's not like it's just a redundant drive. It's actually rebuilding the data every time. So we called their IT, who says, well, you know, we sent a replacement drive just in case of this happening. So why don't you go get the drive if you don't mind, Keith? Can you install it? It'll automatically rebuild. Yeah, I have no problem doing that. So the owner gets up to go yell at somebody in the back as to why haven't you brought me this drive? And as I'm sitting at his desk, I look at the waybill that the IT has sent us, and they actually shipped it to their Tampa office, and we were sitting in Miami. So when the owner, I went and got the owner, so he wasn't, you know, firing people or yelling at them, and said, it's not their fault, it's in Tampa, we need to get this here. And I remember one of the things I did say to the owner is, do me a favor on your way home, go buy a lottery ticket, because today you have a failed drive. We don't know how long it's been failed for. If you had lost a second drive, everything would have been gone. You do have a replacement drive, but it was sent to the wrong location. So when your luck changes, it'll probably be big. So doing a backup, you know, your things fail. Servers blow up, servers go down. Another big one nowadays is protection against ransomware. This is an actual stat, and we've had clients that have been hit with ransomware. Once you're hit with ransomware, your two options are really to restore a backup or pay the money. And these guys are using Bitcoin. I had a client that got hit with ransomware and literally had to have somebody drop off a flash drive with ransomware in a dark alley in New York to the guy that would give them the code. I will tell you this, once you're hit with ransomware, you will start getting those emails and I got one today, and it said, your Delta Airlines account has been charged for this flight. Click here. That click here button actually will infect my computer with ransomware. And they're getting pretty creative. There are UPS notifications. I was telling Mike, who's on the call, our IT guy, that I got one the other day that said, what is this? What the F is this charge? I'm going to take you to court. Click here. So people need to be trained that you do not click on that stuff. We had a client Mike and I were working with, and whenever we do any work on a server, we require that there be a full backup with Verify before we will touch the server. And in this case, we were adding an additional drive and some memory. So we go to schedule it, and I said, I need an email from you, Mr. Owner, that says we've done a full backup with Verify. Well, it turned out that their external drive they were using to back up had actually died. It had failed. So they end up going through getting a new drive, and then finally he sends me an email on a Monday. We've replaced it. Here's my verification. We've done the backup with Verify. We don't know how long that had been down, and we go in on the Friday and do the server work. The following Wednesday, the owner's wife clicks on one of these links, gets ransomware, and it goes through the entire network and hits the server. If they had not had the backup, they would have had to shell out, I think back then it was cheap. It was like $300 to get the encryption key. But like I said, once you're hacked, they're using your email lists, your name, your email address to send out more ransomware to other people. They're data mining for names of people and making it look like it comes from you. So 24 million was paid out to hackers last year. Already this year, they've raised the price, $209 million. These guys have gotten so sophisticated that if you don't pay it, you have a limited time, that they have a 1-800 number to call to pay more money. And I've heard prices of $3,000, $4,000 once that time limit lasts. So rather than give these criminals this money and your lists, sometimes it's easier just to go back and go to yesterday's backup and recreate today's data. Employee downtime. If you have a failure, you have a bunch of people sitting around twiddling their thumbs. Plus, you don't have the information that your customers need right here and there. So that's also a huge cost. Recovery of data is huge. Data corruption. So it's rare with SQL, with the Microsoft SQL database, but there is not a single person on this call that doesn't relate to the fact that this happens with QuickBooks. So the QuickBooks data file, Enterprise, Pro, Premier, they are a proprietary flat file database, and they are subject to corruption. I would be surprised if there was no one on the call that had never seen you need to rebuild your data. Your balance sheet is out of balance in QuickBooks. As a side note, I will tell you that if your data file, your QuickBooks data file becomes corrupt, the first thing into it will tell you is create a new data file. This is some free training. It's actually one of the first 2 slides that I do when I'm doing an Acctivate implementation. Slide number 1 says, never give anyone Intuit your credit card without talking to me. I want to make sure you know what you're getting. And second, never let Intuit tell you you need to create a new data file. Because the way that Acctivate and QuickBooks link, if you create a new QuickBooks data file, you have to create an Acctivate data file, and that is not covered under your SMS. Acctivate has to charge you to move over some of the data, and it's a painful process, to be honest. And finally, the reason why you back up is I'm sure there are people here that like to sleep at night, and that gives you the peace of mind. Anyone that's ever lost data, it's too late at that point. This is not a this will never happen to me scenario. This is a when will this happen to me scenario. So inside of Acctivate, there is a manual backup. You can open an Acctivate file and it says backup company. One of the other things that I've seen is that people that use this, it is entirely manual. Backup company, click OK. But it is not an incremental backup. It's not a differential backup. It is actually an appended backup. What that means is every time I click backup company, it creates a full backup set within that backup file. So your backups can become much, much larger than your actual Acctivate data file. So every time you create a backup, it adds the data set. And I've seen servers where they're all of a sudden out of space because their Acctivate backup is 50, 60, 70 gig, yet their Acctivate data file is under a gig. So just in real world scenario, this case I did 5 backups. The actual demo database is 26 meg. After 5, it was 134 meg. 5 times the size of the original data file. So that's why I'm not a fan of the manual Acctivate backup. Plus, you're relying on somebody to click the button, and they're going to forget. So oftentimes, you can get to something called a SQL backup agent. So this is a specific backup software that's designed to back up a live SQL database, Microsoft SQL database. The prices that I've heard, to do that are, in the $1,000 additional cost to your normal backup process, and you have to make sure that it does that. So if you want to go that route, check with your IT company, because every IT person on the call has a backup software that they prefer, that they like to use. Find out what they recommend to support a SQL database backup if you want to go to the live SQL database backup route. Again, I personally don't think I just don't think it's worth the additional cost because there's other methods. So you do have the capability of automating the backup, the Acctivate backup, using a Windows task. There's a fantastic article on doing this under help.acctivate.com, and it really gives you some detailed instructions on using the Windows Task Scheduler. Every time I've done this, and it's a regular occurrence, it requires some tweaking just to make sure everything's running properly, because different IT folks like to give different permissions based upon the user or the login, shared folders that you have access to. And by the way, when you install SQL, it actually defines what directory the backups go to. You don't get to select it, and that's not a shared folder. So common course of business for me is that I will pull an Acctivate backup when I'm doing work with a client, and I always have to get the IT company to share the backup folder so I can actually get access to it. So you can define that when you set up SQL, but it's not native and installed. So this is a great article, and the way I got to it is I actually just typed backup under the wonderful help.acctivate.com. And the first article is schedule an automatic database backup. Okay. So then the next question I'll talk to folks about is how many days of backup? The automated backup allows me to create a single instance every day. So most people will say to me, give me 7 days of automated backup. So I'll say, okay, I'm going to call it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc., so that I can see that they're happening. I can check and verify them. And I think the most I've had is somebody wanted 2 weeks. So in that case, I made it Sunday through Saturday, and then Sunday 2 through Saturday 2. Just, again, you can back up as many days as you want. Each one becomes an individual task. Okay, so just kind of the examples of how you create a task in Windows Task Manager. I'm not going to go through it. You task that scheduler, you create a basic task. There's some requirements you have, who's logged in. You don't want the user to have to be logged in. What are you configuring it for in the task? How often do you want the task to run? Now, I do weekly because I'm only backing up Sunday's set on Sunday. Monday's set on Monday. So your next screenshot allows you to say, it's weekly, I want to start today, but I want it to recur every week on Sunday. And then you want to start a program. You pick the Acctivate DB maintenance program, and then there are switches or arguments. The example on the help index gives you some great examples, but it's just you're starting Acctivate DB maintenance. /B tells it, I want to back it up. /C is for the company ID. I learned this early that if the company ID has no spaces, you can just type it in. If it does have spaces in it, you need to put quotes in. If you have multiple company files, you need to do one for each company file. The /F allows me to point it not to the default SQL database backup folder, but I can point it somewhere else if I'd like. /O is the important one. That's going to overwrite. So Sunday I do a backup. Next Sunday it doesn't append or create another set. It completely overwrites what's there, which what allows me to keep the space down on my server. And then of course /silent just means that it's going to run in the background and that there's not going to be anything popping up on the server when you're doing the backup. You hit finish, and once you're finished this, you can verify this. I like to verify all 7 days of the backup, 14 days. I run it at the time that I create them to make sure they exist, and then I log back in and check every day or two to make sure that they're actually being created. You know, nothing worse than going, yep, created it, I'm happy, I'm good, and then not checking it and finding out that it's actually not happening. So that's important. This is about the Acctivate data that we're backing up. And by the way, QuickBooks equally important to back up. Make sure that those are the lifeblood of your business, your operational software, your financial software. You want to make sure that you're capturing both of them. So I'm going to turn this over to Mike Ryan from Mendelson Consulting, who is going to give us a little bit of, now that I have the files that are on my server, on my nice redundant RAID array, what do I do with them now?
Thanks. So typically it's, I work on a lot of servers, I do a lot of backups. So I'm talking about mainly backing up the server and the data that's on the server. There's a rule, it's called the 3-2-1 backup rule. And you basically, it's 3 copies of your backup files in 2 different formats, at least 2 different formats in other locations. And then one of those locations should be offsite, and that's for obvious reasons. If there's like a fire, and which we've seen before, we've had clients where the server room actually catches on fire and melts everything. All right, so let's break down these different rules. You should have obviously 3 copies of anything that's important. In the old days, some clients would have, they go, yeah, do you have a backup? They have, yes, they have 1 backup. That backup is just 1 every night, and it overwrites the previous backup. So if there's a problem, I've seen it where they go, there's a problem, let's get that golden 1 backup. And they bring that 1 golden backup in an important chest and open it up. Like, that's going to save the world. And that 1 backup, unbeknownst to them, it had a problem and it wasn't backing up properly. So this is important to have at least 3. I do many more. I also follow a rule. It's called grandfather, father, son backups, where like the son is every day, and it overwrites Monday through Friday. It's 1 backup. It's called the son. And then the father is every week. These are independent backups. And then once a month, that's the grandfather. And they're all 3 different backups. They don't touch each other. So you can always, if there's a problem with the son backups, you can always fall back to the week and go to the father backup. And then from there. Also, for having at least 2 different formats on this. This is similar to having just 1 backup, but also don't just have a bunch of backups of the same software. I've seen this have problems also. You go to a client and I say, where's your backup? He says, oh, don't worry, we have 50 backups that we can go back to, but they're only using 1 software backup program. Unbeknownst to them, this backup program had a problem, and even though they have 50 backups, they're all invalid backups. And also, I like to put these backups not on 1 piece of hardware. I like to put them on, I typically have a NAS, a network address storage. It's like a little hard drive that plugs into the network that you could just send it backups, and it just stores them there. But what if that NAS were to have a problem? So I also have other backups that go to typically a USB hard drive that's plugged into the server directly. And nowadays, even like micro USB sticks are getting quite big to store data. And then one of those backups should be offsite. Now, I've had clients, you can put them on Dropbox, OneDrive, but some of these have limitations and they can fill up. So you have to make sure that your offsite storage supports a large enough file size. So one of these copies, I've had, I know stories where I had one client, he would take one of the backups that was on a hard drive, and once a month he would go to the company bank's safety deposit box and put that in there and bring out another one that had already been in that box. So he'd rotate out of the bank safety deposit box once a month, a backup on a hard drive. And I even know a programmer, as he programs and writes new programs, he has other backups. But one of his backups is he burns a CD and then actually mails it to his mother's house. And hopefully she has a safe place to put it. Nowadays, we do a lot of cloud backups. We don't really send it to our mother anymore. Cloud's pretty popular. There's a lot of companies that will support this. You have to get ones that can support a server. A lot of the real cheap backup companies will only support like home computers, so you have to get one that'll work with the server. But that's typically nowadays where everybody puts their off-site backup. So I typically have two on-site in the building, one on a NAS, one on like an external hard drive, and then one up into the cloud. Of course, these hard drives are no good unless you check and monitor and verify. So I've gone to some clients and I say, where are your backups? And when I go to look at them, I say, but they didn't have a problem. I was checking the back. I haven't seen them in 6 months. And I go, oh, your backup stopped working 4 months ago. So let's get this thing up and running. So at least check it once a month to make sure, because some of these backups will flake out. And they say that you should actually do a full verify. This is harder to do. You really need an IT person to do it. During off hours, take one of those backups that you have and actually restore it back to the system or a test system, and make sure that those backups are actually good backups by really testing them. Yeah, listen to the voices in your head. If you're not paranoid and we're free and as Laura alive and well, the day that you don't check something, it will happen. Just like Benjamin Franklin, he used to say, certain things in life are death and taxes, but if he were to live nowadays, he would also say, your original data storage will also lose. So wherever you have your original data, it eventually is going to fail. I had one client, he went to Tahiti with his wife, hundreds of pictures. He came to his office, put them all on his computer, deleted them off his camera, and he thought he was set, and his hard drive went bad. So like I tell everybody, hard drives will fail. They're made to fail, at least at some point, because they're physically spinning. You don't know if it's 10 seconds from now, 10 minutes from now, or 10 years from now, but hard drives will always fail.
Absolutely. And, the important thing about verify, and anyone that works in IT understands this statement, there's always going to be a single point of failure. So I remember when I worked for Intuit, I spent 10 years working there. Brad Smith, the CEO, invested $400 million in a data center in Washington State, a state-of-the-art facility. And anyone that works with QuickBooks knows that things go down. And after they had implemented this $400 million data center, there was some single point of failure, a switch or something that actually went out, and it took out QuickBase, QuickBooks Online, payments, just the whole raft of Intuit technology. So that's why, this verify is so important, make sure everything works. And we see it more and more with these hackers getting more sophisticated, the denial of service attacks. We use Vonage Business for our phone system. They hacked a central switch that took out Vonage, a couple of other serious applications, because there was a single point on the internet where this happened. A couple of weeks ago, Amazon Web Services went out from a denial of service attack. So you prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So if I have all my cloud, all my storage on Amazon Web Service and they go down the day I need it, or something happens to them, I think there was a question that came up earlier about, third-party hosting. When I was with Intuit, when we designed the hosting program for folks to host QuickBooks, one of the requirements that we had is that the customers always have to have access to a local copy of their backup. And again, if I go back to slide 1, which was backup, you have to have access to it. Don't trust that somebody's going to do it. Verify. This is just so critical. I'd be surprised if anyone on this call had never had a data problem. If you haven't had a data problem, again, it's not if, it's when it's going to happen. Great resource is help.acctivate.com. It's continually growing. It's a living document, and I go to it quite often to find solutions related to Acctivate. Lauren, anyone had questions?
We've actually got one right now that says, if keeping 7 days of backup per task scheduler, do you recommend overwrite existing sets during the manual backups that are done during the import data feature?
So when it comes to the import data, yes. So the short answer is yes. What I'll do on an Acctivate backup is when I'm working with things, let me just quickly open up Acctivate. I don't like to use the default set. And let me go into my nice demo company. One of the things that you can do is give it a different name. So I like to know what's going on. So under the manual backup that it's requiring me to do, I can actually add the date. And that's going to create a nice backup set for me that is allowing me to, of course, small file, but it's now designated as the date. Otherwise, I'm flipping through the server, and then every once in a while I can go on the server and clean those up. Oh yeah, this backup's 4 months old. I can delete that because I've got a more current one. Do we have any other questions?
So we've got another question. I tried OneDrive and I couldn't store all the file names that the server required. They're asking, will Box work?
Yeah, so OneDrive is it's probably one of the most frustrating things I've used over a year. It gets better and better every year. And those file names where you have like a dash or a percentile in your file name, that OneDrive used to choke on those, but nowadays they're fixing those, so it should get better. I don't know about Box. You just have to see. But every day OneDrive gets better. So you'll just have to check the status of it.
Yeah, the Dropbox and OneDrive, those are the more common solutions. What you have to watch for is that there's a file size limitation with OneDrive, and Mike and I were talking about it later, that it was 2 gig at one point per file size. Now I think it might be 10 gig, but I've seen, Acctivate files 20, 30, 40 gig, and if they, if your source, your cloud storage won't back up that size of file, then you need to either talk to them or look for a new one. But yeah, I get it with the special characters, and what I do like about OneDrive is it'll actually tell me when something fails.
Okay, and then we've got another one on how difficult is it to restore the data if the server crashes and you need to restore to a new server? Do all the workstations need to be reinstalled to recover the database links?
Okay, so if your server dies, the workstations actually look at the SQL link. So if you have to restore your entire server, as long as your SQL link, when you install the workstation / in my case, and locally it's / Keith / Acctivate, if that remains the same, those will reconnect once you get there. One of the reasons that I personally like to have a couple of different copies, the network attached storage, the cloud-based, is that anything that's local, the network attached storage, flash drive, it's available quicker. If I have a large data file and Acctivate, it's going to take a while to download, although the time's getting less and less. I transferred a 33 gigabyte file from a client to look at, and it took me 2.5 days. So getting something recovered from the cloud can, depending on your file size, can be much longer. Yeah, but if your server fails and you have to restore Acctivate, you have to reinstall it. You have to reinstall your SQL. If you name it the same or use the defaults, once the server's back up, the rights are back in play, your workstation should just run without any problem. But worst case scenario, you uninstall, reinstall, and away you go.
All right, and then we've got, how does the backup strategy change if the server is located in the cloud versus the desktop, and the desktop users are at various locations?
Well, you're always cloud-based. So every cloud company, whether it's Amazon Web Services or even, and Mike with Azure, they tell you that they do backups. Again, I would rather rely on me than them. So there should be a way of getting that data back locally for that extra copy. So if you are on a cloud-based solution, you would need to talk to them. QuickBooks or Intuit uses Right Networks, and they say always backed up, always available. But that's from the sales side of it. And if you're listening to a salesperson, they're probably not telling you the whole truth. Take your destiny in your own hands. make sure you have a physical copy. Like I said, Amazon Web Services went down the other couple weeks ago. So I'm just more comfortable having my own backup in my own hands and not relying on somebody else.
All right, and then we've got another one on, I have questions about restoring databases for diagnostic purposes. I sometimes want to look at a particular table. Do you have advice on good tools for pulling a single or a few tables out of a backup?
No, usually what I'll do, and I'll actually show you this. So, we've done a backup of the Acctivate company. So I don't ever restore a new or an existing company file as a test. So in database maintenance, it allows me to create a new data file, demo-test, and I'll usually call it practice or whatever. I just create it, and then from the database backup, I will pick my Acctivate demo, the one that I just created today, but I'll change the company file to my test demo and restore it from there. Hang on, let me grab it. Start restore. And now what I've done is I've replicated the data in the database, but under a different name. So my workers keep working. I'm not overwriting something that they're doing. And then I can log into the test company file. We'll also often do this when I'm testing a concept with a client, or we're trying something, we want to see how it works. I'm not a fan of doing things like that live. I have to close it completely. And then what I'll often do when I'm using practice is I'll actually go into configuration manager and have this nice little thing under the company, and I just go, because there's nothing worse than logging into a company file or somebody doing a bunch of work in the wrong company file. So once I've done that, after I log back in, it says right up here, practice do not use. I have had people that have gone into the practice company, done a bunch of work, but that's how I like to test it.
Okay, and then we've got when will Acctivate implement a cloud backup? So I'll jump on this one and then you can add to it if you want to. Typically, this is done through a different service, so you could schedule a SQL backup and then have a service upload the backload file, such as something like Cloudberry with Amazon Web Services, which I know Keith mentioned that did go down temporarily, but that is not something that happens all the time, like at all. So I don't know if you have any comments on that or what your experience is, Keith and Mike.
Yeah, no, you have to, it's generally what we do is defer this to the IT company. Mike has some online cloud storages that he likes, and certainly it has to be something that you're comfortable with, and there are so many solutions out there. I don't know, it's the level of comfort. I'm not the one supporting it, so whatever your IT has to support, they have to be comfortable with.
Do you have any cloud provider recommendations, Keith? I'm not sure if this is specifically about backups or if this is just cloud provider in general. I know for in general, we do Acctivate. We've got a lot of customers on Right Networks, InSync, Harbor Cloud, Novel Aspect, and those are just off the top of my head to name a few.
Yeah, so if we're talking about applications, service providers, ASPs, it's when you get into the QuickBooks Acctivate world, they all have different rules. And in our business, we talk to them all, but it comes down to what add-ons are you going to use? So Acctivate clearly is an add-on to QuickBooks. What if you need something for reporting, like a Clarify QQ? Anytime we get out of a standard QuickBooks world, we recommend that you talk to the different options out there and say, how much is it going to cost for me to add Acctivate to your web services? It can get very, very costly. There are some of the providers that go through this almost insanely rigorous approval process. So we have a client that's a franchisor, a small one, has 40,000 individual stores across the country. And they built a web connector between their point of sale and QuickBooks. So we went to one of the hosts and they said, oh, we need to approve that and there's a cost to approve it. And I went, but you're talking about 40,000 potentials here. Not everyone's going to do it, understand that. But you want to charge them so they can pay you for it was just one of those weird scenarios. So I always go back to the cloud provider from the application side. What do you support? If I add something on, how much does it cost monthly? Because I like to charge extra. What's the turnaround time to getting something that I need approved? And then once we've done all that, then you know what the cost out the door is. If it's for online backups, there's a couple that we like. Mike, what was?
Well, it depends what you want. They won't work on where you put the Acctivate in a third-party cloud app. This would have to be a server that you own yourself. You install it on the software. Now, your server can be in the cloud or where you have full control of it. So there's tons of them. You can get anything from high-end, 10 times more expensive, to where you install the software. There's people that monitor through this other company, and they'll call you, hey, Mike, I noticed your computer, some of the backups from last night didn't fail, or they failed. Do you want us to take a look at them? But those are quite expensive. I go down to a very raw, bare bottom backup where I have to do all the setup and I have to do the monitoring. One of them is just Jungle Disk, but it's a very raw. A lot of people might not like it because you have to pretty much do everything, but it's really cheap.
And also, just a note, if you're going to be using a hosting provider for Acctivate, keep in mind, like Keith was saying, what other functions are you going to need? So make sure that, for instance, if you're using Acctivate Mobile, is the hosting provider going to be able to grant you access to IIS? Are they going to be able to set that up for you so your local devices can access your hosted server instance? And another thing is a shipping workstation. Some hosting providers only allow you to use specific shipping workstation apps. So that's another thing to think about. Okay, and then we have, is there a way to archive the old data years within Acctivate? Currently, we support the QuickBooks condense function, but that's not like a archival function specifically for Acctivate. And Keith, I know that you get that question if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, it's reducing the file size of your Acctivate file. The thing I like about SQL is I really don't have to. Now, I've had clients where my favorite is pictures and attached documents. Those types of things tend to take up a lot of data file. I had a client that was brand new to Acctivate. I walked in and their file size was a gig. And I went, whoa, how did you start 3 weeks ago and you're at a gig? Well, in the products tab, they were loading high-res 2 megabyte images for every one of their products. I was just, I had them reduce that. So there's some decisions that you want to make for stuff that you're attaching. I have another client that had a very large data file, and of the 33 gig, 30 gig were attached PDFs that they had email sent back and forth, all of that stuff. So I've never seen a need to really condense a Acctivate file. You just give Microsoft some money and throw some hardware at it, and you've got all that historical information. But like I said, there could be other ways to condense the size of the actual file.
Okay, and then we got another question on, can you use Windows Task Scheduler to create a backup for QuickBooks?
The problem with that is you can't just do a copy because QuickBooks is usually run in the background. A copy will fail. Basically you have to write your own script at that point. You have to use shadow copy, so it gets a little tricky on like QuickBooks, where it's an application that's always running. In other words, you can't have everybody get out so that you can run this task.
Yeah, and QuickBooks, there's a preference that you can have it automatically back up every, annoyingly 4 times, I think, is the default. So every fourth time you shut down QuickBooks, it asks you for backup. But I would have to check, and honestly, because of that, every 4 times.
I use a program called ThinkBack Pro. It's like a $60 program. It's real easy. Again, it's pretty raw, so you need an IT person to do it. But I could have that run, 5 times a day and put these backups of QuickBooks all over the place in all these 3 different locations. So there's little simple programs that you can get that can do that with people using QuickBooks while you're backing it up. Yeah, it works real well.
So if there's one takeaway, it's always backup, 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 backup.
And then one more.
Yeah, just for safekeeping.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye, Mike. Thanks for joining us. And Keith, thanks again for all that great information. I think we really got some good info there. And if you have any questions, always create a support request through the help site. And our support team would gladly answer any other questions that you may come across. Have a great day.
Thank you.